Aftershocks from being dumped by your child. Let's discuss. What happens next? You are likely experiencing actual trauma in your life. If you've never gone to war, if you've never had any kind of major loss in your life, this may be traumatic for you. Ambiguous loss. Let's talk about this concept. It is characterized by a lack of closure and ongoing uncertainty. So, is my child dead, alive, happy, sad? You don't know. Ambiguous loss can lead to complex and endless grieving if not addressed, and wounds can be reopened pretty easily if you see them on social media, if you hear about them from friends, if you run into them or see them at the supermarket. Wounds can be totally reopened. The key to dealing with ambiguous loss is accepting that closure is impossible. This loss may continue indefinitely and there may be no resolution, so you have to make peace with that. I think it's really important to acknowledge the trauma. For me, this was the most traumatic event of my life, but trauma is relative. And for me, my mom died when I was relatively a young adult. That was the most traumatic thing in my life formerly. I had a miscarriage. That was actually very traumatic as well. My dad died during my estrangement, which was also kind of traumatic. But the thing about the parents dying is that even though my mom died way too young, you do expect your parents to die. So society has ways for dealing with actual death, and that helped me through it. But my child, my firstborn child, leaving the way she did was completely unexpected. Never thought it would happen. Thought we had been good parents. And so to me, who's never been to war, I've never had a major health scare. So I've been very lucky in that respect. For me, this was the most traumatic event of my life, and it still is. I have never gone through so much heartbreak. That was just my reaction as a mom, being rejected by a beloved child. That's just my response, and I'm not going to apologize for it. I felt terrible, and it is natural for any mom who's poured into a child to feel terrible, and dads too. Don't let me forget the dads after something like this. So this can be traumatic. And it's not so different from some of the symptoms of PTSD. Now, I invite you to look into that. Again, no expert here. Some of the symptoms of trauma, though, that I do want to touch on, you may relate to. So social withdrawal is super common. After this, you start avoiding the activities that reminded you of this event. You withdraw into yourself, your own world. You withdraw from friends who remind you of her, family that reminds you of her. Also losing interest in things that you liked doing. Emotional numbing, basically, is super common, where you're just kind of cruising through life and you don't feel anything. That is very common. Other common trauma responses are nightmares, confusion, disorientation, mood swings. There's a whole lot more. Again, I invite you to look into it. It's important with ambiguous loss to recognize the necessity of processing it. So you really need to engage with the grieving process, because that's what this is, rather than trying to avoid it, to facilitate healing. Healing is a very active process. You need to face it head on. The truth is, loss is a part of life. People come and go from our lives. And sadly, that includes our children. We need to remember that we raised them. They're off in the world doing their own adult things, and we've done our job. They've flown the nest. They're gone. Maybe we didn't expect them to never come back, but their choices are their choices, and we have to move on. How to live with ambiguity is an important skill to learn. We'll talk more about this in coming videos. One question you can ask yourself is, what does this estrangement mean to you? This is a good journaling exercise. What does this estrangement mean to you? It's a way to find meaning in what's happening. You can ask yourself, how do I let go of what I can't control? Who am I now that my loved one is ambiguously lost? What do I do with my conflicted feelings? Another good question to answer that will help you kind of normalize the ambivalence. How do I both let go and still remember, which helps you revisit attachment? How do I find hope in an ongoing loss with no closure? Another idea for dealing with the ambiguous loss, because when you grieve someone at a funeral, there's a ceremony, friends gather, there's a party afterwards. Party is probably the wrong word, a celebration of life afterwards. There's a whole ritual around when somebody dies and a community comes together to help people grieve the loss. For ambiguous loss, there is no such ritual. So I suggest, or, think about making one of your own. So, for my husband, he got to a point where he was just, I guess, he had moved through the grieving process, and he had kind of a little funeral in his mind for our daughter. He was out on a walk in the woods, and he just pictured her kind of angelic with her favorite little baby toy, where he wished her the best and let her go with love. And that helped him. Some people write letters and then burn them. So perhaps you can think of a ritual that might help you move through your grieving process at the end when you are ready to let go. What to expect as time goes on? Get comfortable with chaos is my big advice to you. Get comfortable with chaos. You're going to go through a whole bunch of fluctuating emotions, and they're going to come and go like the tides, not even that regularly, and it's going to be all over the place. It's going to be a whirlwind. So get ready for a roller coaster of anger, confusion, sadness, coming and going at weird times. They may change, lessen, or resurface during significant dates or events. Mother's Day is always a hard one for people. Father's Day, the child's birthday is always hard. Holidays can also be very difficult, especially if you used to gather and now you don't. But just be prepared to adjust to a new normal. It's just important to admit to yourself that life has changed and it is 100% out of your control. You also need to prepare yourself for triggers, anniversaries, holidays, birthdays, and family gatherings, like I mentioned before. I suggest you mark them on your calendar and make plans for dealing with them, and just make new traditions. Evolving relationships. Estrangement may affect your relationships with other family members and friends, so just be aware that might happen. Some may offer support while others might not understand your experience at all, and they may pull away. So I would be ready with various answers to that question. How are the kids? Especially if people haven't seen you for a while. You need to come up with various answers depending on how well you know them, and have 3 answers for the 3 different types of people. You know them really well, you know them a little bit, you don't know them at all, want to end the conversation. How much time does it take to heal is a big question that a lot of people want to know. There is no set answer. There's no answer to this. I've seen it range from 1 month to 30 plus years, and they're still not healed. For me, it was about 3 years. Why? Because I found my way through this process, and I was determined to not let this ruin my life. And during my estrangement, I watched my dad die. And it was another reframing of life is short. And this is what it is. And I am not going to live my life in misery. And I knew I needed to heal and move on. So I resolved to do it. And like I said, it's a spectrum, 95% there. Yeah, sure, something may reopen it. Even if that happens, it's temporary. I'm just moving on. I would also say for this to work, you need to trust the process. We all have ideas about how life should be, what we expect and deserve as parents. We all have these ideas in our head. We may talk about leaving it to God or the universe, but we don't, because in our heart of hearts, we can't let go. Surrender is key. There is a moment of truth in life where you just have to let go. Self-reflection and responsibility. You must be compassionate with yourself through this process. You do need to understand your role in the estrangement. We each had our role that we played in our individual estrangements with our children. It's kind of like you have to peel back the onion, peel back the layers, and just see what's there. It is important to acknowledge what was done and to learn from any contributing actions or inactions that we as parents may have had in the situation. Definitely highly recommend putting yourself in your child's shoes and imagine what they may have been thinking or feeling as they were making their choices in the midst of whatever was going on around them. This can be hard to do, but it is super, super important. But the number one rule through all of this is to be compassionate with yourself. Self-compassion, like you would a friend. Remember, rule number one, treat yourself like you would a friend. Don't get into that habit of letting the shiz talker talk you down and make you feel like crap. You need to be compassionate with yourself as you examine what went right and what went wrong and sift for anything you could do to make it right. Or if not, just process what happened and make a plan for going forward. You definitely need to embrace vulnerability in your self-reflection. So, you're going to confront some uncomfortable emotions and truths about your behavior and impacts. Do it kindly. We all mess up. It's okay. There's no such thing as a perfect parent. Just bring whatever mistakes there are to light, reflect, learn, forgive, and move on. Distinguishing between guilt and responsibility is really important in this phase. Guilt is an emotional state that often involves that self-blame that I was talking about and remorse for perceived wrongdoings or failures. And this can be paralyzing or even self-punitive. Responsibility, however, is an action-oriented approach that involves acknowledging one's role in a situation and taking proactive steps to address the issue, promoting growth and change. Very different, know the difference. Reconciling your own heart. So you want to use insights gained from self-reflection to make changes in your behavior toward others, especially with the relationships that you still have around you. Because sometimes something we did with the estranged child that maybe drove them away is something that we're doing with other people, and maybe it's time to fix that. So I went through a period of acknowledging my role, my daughter's role, my husband's role, and I chewed on it for a very long time. Despite what the internet thinks, I chewed on it for a very long time. I did apply compassion, although not at first, and I did end up forgiving all three of us for the mistakes all three of us made, and this opened the door to acceptance, healing, and peace. Compassion towards self and others is so, so important. When you wander into the weeds of self-accountability, bring yourself compassion. And I know I'm beating this dead horse, but it's that important. Owning up to mistakes and learning from them is a sign of strength and maturity. The compassion also that you bring to yourself must extend to your child, no matter how hard that is. Your child is also doing the best they can with what they know, given their mental, physical, and environmental circumstances. So we always say that to them. I did the best I could with what I had. Your child is in the same position, likely doing the best they can with what they know in the situation they're in. And, this is just how it worked out. So in the Aftershocks phase, there is a period of assessment where you essentially look at your own chessboard. What's happening there? So you want to identify, number one, key relationships that you still have. Map them out. Not just with your estranged child, but also other family members, friends, and colleagues. Who's still in your life that's important? Draw that map. Recognize those who are actually empathetic and listen and are there for you emotionally. But also look at these relationships to see if that similar pattern of conflict or behavior exists and take steps to correct it with those you still have. You want to understand people's different communication styles. So take a look at your own communication style and compare it to your estranged child. Where did you maybe clash just on a style basis? Misunderstandings and conflicts can easily arise when we don't understand where the kids are coming from, how they process information, and how they communicate it. You also want to analyze behavioral patterns. So observe and reflect on the recurring patterns that may have led to the negative outcomes, and consider both your behavior and the responses. What were the dynamics at play? Definitely take a look at the external influences. How have external factors played into this estrangement? Stress, societal expectations, cultural differences that may have influenced the situation and perception within your relationship. And consider that these are, just considering these gives you a more nuanced understanding of what's happening. You also want to nurture your remaining relationships. So be honest with those closest to you. If they're not supportive, then maybe reassess that relationship. Definitely, you want to really appreciate the diverse perspectives that empathetic friends and family can provide, and have an honest conversation with any children who are not estranged, just about what's happening, and be prepared for any kind of reaction. They may be with you, they may be against you, they may not want to hear about it. But do be honest with them about what's happening and how you're trying to cope with them and how that may affect your relationship, or how you're trying to not let it affect your relationship. You do want to step outside your box during this process. So I would say consider giving and receiving support to other parents going through this. Helping others helps you heal. And I would say open your heart to new ideas, new ways of looking at things. You want to work toward that surrender. Now, in the aftershocks phase, the reach out or not reach out question always comes up, and there's no one answer. It depends on your situation. If your child said, "Don't contact me," it's probably best not to reach out. Let them have their space. I learned this the hard way. After reaching out multiple times with no response, I was instructed not to contact unless it was a family emergency. There were 2 family emergencies that I did contact her for, and there were probably 4 other non-emergencies. I'm thinking it was about 4 that I probably shouldn't have done it. I wish I had known. If your child hasn't set a clear boundary, then maybe approach lightly, perhaps by sending a birthday, Thanksgiving, Christmas greeting, card, text, whatever. But I would acknowledge their need for space and keep your expectations low. If your child has blocked you on social media, in the beginning, you'll probably look for ways around it because the internet is public, and in the aftershocks phase, we're still trying to figure out what's going on. And so we'll try to see clues by looking at their profiles if we're able to see them. Some platforms can't block access. Facebook, you can block access. I think Instagram you can too, but some you can't, like TikTok, YouTube, Twitch, X, and LinkedIn. They can't really block access. But I recommend weaning yourself off looking at them on social media over time, because it's like picking a scab. It's just picking a scab. It's just, preventing you from healing. Try to wean yourself off of it. If your child is addicted to drugs, alcohol, or is abusing you, abuse, verbal or physical, is no one has the right to abuse you, not even your child. So I would like to establish that baseline. No one has the right to abuse you, not even your child. Drug and alcohol addictions can actually steal the soul and morph your child into someone completely unrecognizable. So I guess I would just say, do what your heart drives you to do to help in that situation, and maybe connect with other parents who are in that specific situation to get their input as well. But the child must want to save themselves. And if they don't, I'm not sure there's much you can do. If your child has just disappeared, I would say this is kind of a follow your heart situation. Do what you think needs to be done or not. There's just no right answer. You can network with family, friends, coworkers, or anyone who might know something about your child's whereabouts. You can hire a private investigator if necessary, but consider the consequences. And this is a very invasive way to go, and I would be prepared for the worst, the best, and nothing found. And whether or not the private investigator contacts or not contacts, again, really tricky ground. People who've, been contacted by a PI at the behest of their parents, it's a huge invasion of privacy, and I don't see many reasons to go there, but of course the choice is yours. What about the grandchildren? This is a really hard one. If your child forbids contact, it's really best to respect that boundary, and it is terrible to deprive a young person of the relationship with their grandparents, because that offers a completely different perspective of life. But you kind of have to respect the child's boundary unless there's some extenuating circumstance like the grandchildren are being abused, neglected, something like that. Grandparents in this situation will sometimes accumulate cards, letters, gifts, or family memories for the grandchildren to receive later in life, scrapbooks. Or if the boundaries are less clear, you can try sending the occasional notes, cards, and gifts, which may or may not be well received. Again, there's no right answer. Online resources. Educating yourself around this entire parental estrangement topic is a good way to heal. I invite you to join my newsletter to receive a list of resources that helped me heal. Here are your action steps from this video if you would like to proactively pursue healing. Number 1, think about doing a release ritual. What would that look like? Number 2, again, spend at least 5 minutes every morning being thankful for anything at all. This does wonders to help reset your mind and move you toward the healing path. For clarity, I'm not a therapist. I'm just a mom who's gone through it, sharing with you what I've learned along the way. Next time, we're going to talk about emotional triage. How do I cope with this crazy roller coaster of emotions that I'm going through?